Welcome to the Lemons and Pineapples podcast. I'm your host, Emma O'Brien, personal development coach, HeartMath practitioner, dog photographer, and entrepreneur. In this podcast, I share tools, strategies, and amazing guest interviews to help you improve your mindset and your well-being with a sprinkle of fun and probably some mention of dogs along the way. So without further ado, let's squeeze the day. Before we jump into today's episode, I'm looking for a handful of people who can beta test a new coaching package I'm offering. I work with people who are stuck in their lives or careers and would like support in making changes, as well as people who battle with the effects of stress and anxiety. If you feel you would benefit from some coaching, which I'm going to offer at a 50% discount for my beta testers, please send me a DM on Instagram at Emma O'Brien Coach and we can arrange a time to chat. Hi folks, welcome to episode 18 of the podcast. Today my guest is Kate King and we're talking about how you can learn to feel happier by tapping into some Buddhist wisdom. First, a little bit about Kate. Kate King's experience is sourced from her 15+ year background as a licensed professional counsellor prior to becoming a life coach. As the founder and owner of the Radiant Life Project, Kate's mission is to create an empowering ripple effect with her healing strategy that teaches how to activate an inner spark for undeniable radiance in life with personal growth books, retreats, workshops, inspirational public speaking, creative consulting, and individual coaching. Kate is widely known for helping her clients and audience learn to shine so brightly they impact and improve the lives of those around them. Kate's work is filled with an expansive array of impactful resources, tools, and practices for an accessible entry point into a life of greater authenticity, fulfillment, and illumination. Welcome to the podcast, Kate.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here with you.
So we're talking today about the elusive topic of happiness. I think most people spend quite a lot of time chasing it. A lot of people don't find it. A lot of people feel unhappy. And I'm curious as to your path to getting to a space of your Radiant Life project that you've got. You've got a book, which we're going to talk a little bit more about as well as we go through. I'd love to know a little bit more about you and your story and how you've come on this path of finding you're happy and helping other people to find theirs.
Sure. So my path, like everyone's, has been kind of a meandering journey through this wild experience of life that is really complex and it's multifaceted with the complexities of relationships and of really difficult emotions and experiences in life that sometimes go how you want and sometimes really don't go how you want. And so I have had my fair share of difficult experiences, traumas, and moving through those experiences, seeking growth, finding happiness, losing happiness. I went through a really profound period of burnout at the end of the quarantine period of the pandemic because I had been fueling my psychotherapy practice with so much intention to help people that I just fried myself. So that was a really low point in my life. And I took a 5-month sabbatical, which is not a normal thing to do in the psychotherapy industry. And I got a lot of ridicule for it, actually. And during that time, I really circled back to what is missing in my happiness equation? How did I get to this level of burnout? And I really believe that in order to live a happy life, you have to be constantly self-reflecting and asking yourself these really tough, honest questions. How am I getting in my own way? How am I creating my own unhappiness? How am I perpetuating the thing that I don't actually want anymore? And so I spent many months asking myself those questions and getting some really powerful answers. And then you have to make the changes in accordance with the answers you get from yourself. So there's the knowing and then there's the doing. And so I spent a lot of time doing that. And to be honest with you, happiness it's not something you achieve. It's a constant pivot to bring yourself into alignment with what your moment that you're currently in is asking for. And so once you start to learn how to follow those breadcrumbs and be willing to be flexible along the way to make those pivots, then happiness becomes more of a journey, and it truly is not a landing place or a destination.
Yeah, I think happiness is the way I see it. It's a way of being, and we get to choose. It's about choosing feelings. It's about making life choices that serve us better. I'm so intrigued. Two things. The burnout episode, I've also had a huge episode of burnout, so I can relate to what a core shaker that is. And I think sometimes it takes something massive like that to, I would liken it to being tipped upside down and having, everything shaken out of you and shaken loose on the floor. And then you get dropped on your head and you're sitting in a pile on the floor. And I think it's moments like that that make you reflect and say, what have I been doing all of this work for? Why have I been running myself into the ground for what? And it's a common theme that's coming up in these conversations, that there are big wake-up calls that happen for people, and they come out of profound and unpleasant life experiences. And I am very intrigued that in the psychotherapy industry, you were ridiculed for taking a gap for your own mental health. That's fascinating to me.
I know it's really opposite of what you would hope from healers, to be in support of each other's healing. But really, a dominant narrative I was met with was, you can't just not take care of people. So many people need taking care of, and you're skilled and qualified. How could you just stop giving?
Yeah.
And so I heard that from colleagues. I heard it from some of my clients who were really angry with me for taking a break from our work, even though I provided them with resources for their continuing care. But then there was a second wave that came through. This was really interesting. After all of that ridicule had moved through, there were people who came out of the woodwork and said, wow, you're really brave to be doing this. And I've never heard of anyone doing this before. And I don't know if I believe I can do this or not, but seeing you do it gives me some hope that it's possible. So
Yes.
it did it brought out whatever people had at their surface level on their identity and what they felt their worth and value was as a healer. And some of these people were not healers. Some of them were part of other industries, but it was really interesting how different people responded when they saw someone taking care of themselves.
Yes. And I wonder if there's not a big trigger point for a lot of people in there that wish they could also stop, but didn't feel able to. Because I think often my experience of burnout, it was very difficult. Even though I was in a complete state, it was very difficult for me to stop, because there was the fear of what will happen financially if I stop. Fundamentally, what will happen financially if you don't stop was probably what I should have been asking myself. But, a few years of self-development work later, I would perhaps get to that question quicker, and I wouldn't allow myself to get to a point of burnout like that again. But I think it's not acceptable in the society we live in, with this hustle and grind culture. How dare you stop? Who are you to take a gap? Because I think it reminds everybody else of, oh shit, I'm also completely exhausted. I wish I could do that, but like you say, I'm too afraid to. I'm not sure I'm allowed to. And I imagine it brought up a bit of resentment and a bit of jealousy for people that you'd done that.
I think we all act as mirrors for each other.
Yeah.
And sometimes when we see someone else doing something that would be unspeakable or intolerable for ourselves, it's really triggering. And on the converse, when we see someone doing something that we like about ourselves, or we do think is possible for ourselves, it's easy to support them in that. So as long as you hold the perspective that relationships are like mirrors, they can all be used for learning. And also you learn to take things a lot less personally, because hardly ever is anyone's reaction truly about you.
Absolutely. And that's such a great piece of advice, and it's something to remember, especially if you're in a situation where someone's been very reactive with you. It says an awful lot more about what's going on inside their brains and in their minds than it does about you. If you're able to let that go, which is easier said than done, which brings us nicely to our talk about Buddhist philosophy, because there's a lot of elements of letting go in that, of non-attachment. And tell me a little bit, let's start with the unhappiness piece of it. What's the Buddhist theory on why people are unhappy?
Well, the Buddhist perspective on life is that it is supposed to come with a lot of suffering. That's kind of why we're here. We're here to navigate the suffering. We're here to dig in and do the work around learning how to see suffering as something that's universal and it's something that's inevitable. And also, the work is to learn detachment from that suffering and have a mindful presence with it where you can see it as a normal human experience, but you don't have to be flooded by it all the time or let it guide your life. So it's sort of learning to live with the unhappiness that is part of the human condition without letting it drive the whole bus.
Yeah, and I think the thing I have noticed with people is that people very rarely are brave enough to sit with their own discomfort and their own uncomfortable feelings. I think this is a lot of the time why people chase happiness in a car, or I must have these clothes, or I must look a certain way, or I must live in a certain place. And it's external things that we think will make us happy. And I've been guilty of doing it. I'm a little bit partial to the odd expensive handbag, but I've found that, I've thought about it and I've thought, oh, this is really great. And I've gone and got it and just thought, this is a nice bag. I just spent an awful lot of money on it and I don't feel any different at all. It's like and it's just it's almost pointless. And actually reflecting on what happiness is about moments. I think it's about connection with people, but I think it's about allowing that connection to ebb and flow.
Right. So and I think it's important to acknowledge that there's a difference between happiness and joy.
Yes.
So joy is an experience that happens in the moment. It's a burst of experience through the body that's brought along by something that's pleasurable, something enjoyable, something that has really deep meaning. And so joy is sort of like a flooding warmth that comes through the body. And there are points of joy that can exist kind of like Christmas lights, right? That it's not always on and you just kind of move from one point to the next through time. But happiness can be considered kind of like a baseline where joy can happen, sadness can happen. You can move up and down from that baseline of happiness, but ultimately feel a level of satisfaction or contentment or connection with life. And so I think to have that distinction between happiness and joy gives people a lot more breathing room, that you don't have to feel constant joy in order to identify as a happy person or create a happy life. It's really being mindfully attuned to those moments that feel uplifting and embodying them with your presence instead of missing them, because they will come and go. They're like waves. They're supposed to. But if you miss them because you're on autopilot or you're just looking for your next fix, then the point of having any of those waves at all is sort of pointless, really. It's about noticing them.
Yeah, and I think coming back to what you said about life being suffering, which sort of sounds really a bit heavy and awful, is and the Buddhist philosophy around that is that I think often we're very focused on what we don't have. We're very focused on where we're unhappy. We're very focused on what we've not got that we want. And I think the switch on that is to actually, and how you're able to feel happier as a general baseline and able to really notice these moments of joy, because I think a lot of people completely miss them. And it's being able to be content with little things like, one thing I find really that kind of brings me joy is if you hear small children like really laughing. It's just it's just such a wonderful sound to listen to. And I think it's just things like that, just being able to pick up the small moments. But if we're stuck in this space of suffering, you don't notice them and life passes you by. So if life is suffering, what's the point?
Well, I think that there's a lot of value in contrast. So if life is suffering, then that is how you know what joy and warmth and light feel like, because sometimes you have to know the counter opposite of something in order to appreciate what actually feels positive and uplifting. And without contrast, without darkness, we wouldn't know light. Without coldness, we wouldn't know warmth. And so I think that's a really important recognition that it's okay to embrace the shadow elements of life that are less tolerable, more uncomfortable, because you know you're doing so in the service of learning how to appreciate the brighter, warmer aspects of life, and seeing the experience of living as a holistic experience. That's not all one thing and none of the other, but it's because of our suffering that we can appreciate those moments of ease and of joy. And so really, we should be thankful for the contrast that that darkness provides us, because it gives us a more expansive mindset on joy.
Yeah. And what comes to mind for me as well is when we think about, life as suffering, which sounds a bit heavy and hectic. However, I think one of the things that I find joy in, that makes me happy, and I think is something that is also a great antidote to unhappiness, is doing something to alleviate the suffering of others and being able to generate compassion and take action. So I saw a great definition that compassion is empathy in action, really. Empathy, we feel the suffering as well, but we still sit and go, oh, that's really sad. In compassion, we say, I feel the suffering of this person or this animal. What can I do to make a difference for them? And we're recording with 2 dogs behind me in here who are sitting very quietly and patiently. But I do a lot of stuff for a rescue charity here that looks after dogs, and they also look after people and provide veterinary care to folks in a very impoverished area. And I go there. It's a place called Claw. There's a lot of suffering. It's not a nice place to spend time, but I know I can go and volunteer my time and I can do something to help. So I go and photograph the dogs that are looking for homes, and invariably with some nice professional pictures, it helps the dogs find homes. So there is the suffering, but I'm able to do something to help, and it makes me feel good.
Right. Well, what you're speaking to is that human beings are meaning makers.
Mm-hmm.
We love to make meaning of our experiences and feel like the effort that we're putting forth in our life is productive and helpful. And so when you do meaningful work, it acts as a counterbalancing force to the suffering, and it lets you feel like there is a purpose for that suffering. There is a reason that we're here. We're collectively connected in ways that we understand, and I think in small part, but really don't understand. And so it's that giving. And there have actually been studies to show that the power of gratitude on the brain is more impactful when you're the recipient of gratitude. So like when your dogs feel your love and they feel your gratitude, it's impacting their brains, and it's also impacting yours by giving it. Yes. So this is beneficial for us on biophysiological levels that move through our emotional, our mental, our physical, our spiritual beings, that giving and receiving is a really big antidote to suffering.
Yeah. And I think that's a wonderful way of putting it. And I think it's very easy to get caught up in how bad things are happening in the world. I mean, I know as the time we're recording, there's horrendous things happening in Israel and Palestine. And I think it's very easy to get caught up in all of the awfulness and the suffering and the unhappiness. And it's finding some way of not getting stuck there, of how can you transmute that into something more useful. And even if that is a case of actually just sitting, and one of the things I like to try to do when I'm meditating is to sit and just think about radiating compassion out for people, because there's very little any of us can do about what is essentially a war situation that's happening. But I know there's been studies done in areas where people collectively meditate on a regular basis. Crime rates are lower. There's all sorts of all sorts of things that are measurable, that just having people collectively emanating the energy of compassion makes a difference in that local community.
Absolutely. I think there's a balancing point between what in Buddhist terms is called impermanence, which is the belief that things always change. And so we shouldn't get attached to anything. Even the unspeakable horror of war will change, right? But then there's this other piece about, no, things matter. This is real. There's hardship happening all around the globe, in your backyard and beyond, and we should act and we should care. And so, like all things, there's a balancing act between being compassionate and present, but not getting so flooded by the suffering that it immobilizes you, and also understanding that things are impermanent and everything will change, but also not letting that make you careless or apathetic. Right. And so finding the middle path is usually the right way to handle situations like that, because we can swing kind of like a pendulum between those extremes. Yeah. And it's our job to keep ourselves centered and grounded in that middle place.
Yeah, and I think the impermanence piece is a very interesting one, because I think a lot of us have deep unhappiness from the fact that life is impermanent. We don't like change. And I think a lot of unhappiness, and I know it's something I've shifted in my way of being with a meditation practice and with some Buddhist philosophy and a bit of a change of how I do things, is being able to allow things to flow. Because we become extremely unhappy when we cling to circumstances have to stay the same, relationships have to stay the same, people mustn't die, we can't lose things. And the nature of being human is that things change, relationships change, people and pets die. And it's a hard reality of being human. And it is hard. It's very, very, I think it's one of the most difficult pieces of being in this human existence is, that people and things, and they come and go. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's part of the learning. I think that's part of why we're here. We're supposed to experience the suffering for the purposes of learning and growth. And it can be really comforting when you're in an experience of fear or loss to look outside the human experience into nature and see that there are cycles all around us of beginnings and endings. There are little deaths every day. Even within our own bodies, the end of an exhale is a little death, and the intake of an inhale is a new life. And you look outside, the sun sets every day, and then it rises the next day. There's death and rebirth. The tides ebb and flow. The moon waxes and wanes, right? Butterflies only live for a number of days. There are cycles of life and death, symbolically and literally, all around us all the time. And if we can eject ourselves to a more broad, expansive consciousness outside of our human capacity and see that life isn't just from our egocentric perspective of I, we are part of something here. And it's really comforting to expand to that level and be able to think, okay, so if you look at Earth from the space station, your problems don't seem that big anymore, right? Even the Earth itself doesn't look that big anymore. So it's all a matter of perspective. And it's really key to get out of your own perspective, because it's so limiting to think that the I you identify as is all there is. And we're surrounded every day by all forms of nature and life that can reflect these teachings.
Yep. I think the one piece I have learned from this impermanence of people and pets is to actually appreciate each day and be present with people and pets you do have. Because I think so often, as we said at the beginning, we're distracted with, what have I got to do? What don't I have? Why am I unhappy? And sometimes if you can come into the present and just be, it's totally changing in terms of helping you feel happier. And you can appreciate, I've got lots of dogs here. So I appreciate when I sit with them and they come and sit with me and we just sit and chill, and it's just you just being. And I think often we're all human doings a lot of the time, and it's about switching into this mode of just being a human being and enjoying the moment and what's happening. This is where you get the sparks of joy that come in. This is where you have that baseline of happiness is increased when you're able to appreciate what you've got in the present moment. Coming back to your point about gratitude, it's such a powerful thing to have a gratitude practice, because Absolutely. It focuses you on what you've got. And I think, right. A lot of us have got an awful lot to be grateful for most days, I think.
I think all of us do. Even the people who are in the deepest suffering, I think there are always gifts in the suffering. There are lessons. And I think it's important to not miss the lesson. Mm-hmm. And when speaking of perception and perspective, if you can zoom kind of out and then zoom in, zoom out of your experience and then into your experience, and really try to see what you're going through from multiple perspectives, then from an embodied place, you can ground into the joy of the moment or the gifts. Even people who have chronic pain, if they apply a mindfulness lens to their pain, they notice that the pain changes. It's not always really acute or severe. It comes in waves. And if they can track that, then they can notice that there are moments where they actually feel okay. Mm-hmm. So I think if we apply that wisdom to suffering of physical, emotional, spiritual levels, collective levels, then we release ourselves from this all or none thinking. Yes. That things are either really bad or they're really good. And we allow ourselves to exist in the gray, where this is just complex human life. And yeah, they're bad and they're good. There's mm-hmm. happiness and there's sadness and grief and all the things we're supposed to be experiencing here.
Yes. And I think sometimes things just are. And it's that acceptance of what they are right now. And sometimes I think that's incredibly enlightening. Kate, I'd like to hear a little bit more about your book, The Radiant Life Project. Tell us a bit more about that, because I've enjoyed this conversation very much with you sharing your wisdom, which I'm sure you'll be imparting in your book.
Thank you. I actually just got the hard copies in my hands. So this is my book, The Radiant Life Project. It's a comprehensive download of everything I know from my clinical experience and also from my personal journey of practicing what I teach. And I really wanted to create an accessible guide for people to do this work themselves. If they don't want therapy, if it feels too expensive to go to therapy, or there are other limitations, my hope is that this book will help provide an entry point for them into whatever is causing them suffering, stuckness, unhappiness, darkness that they feel they don't know how to escape. And I'm hoping to teach people that by first healing yourself and your inner wounds, you can then impact society and all of your relationships for the better by being a more radiant you in the way that you show up in the world. I think it all starts with us and then it beams outward from there. So this is sort of my offering to the world that's based on neuroscience, psychology, Buddhist mythology, creativity and art therapy, personal story, and some of my healing tools that I've offered over time that have had really strong success rate. And I hope people will really benefit from this.
Sounds absolutely brilliant. We will be putting a link to the book in the show notes, and there's a 30% discount if people buy directly from your publisher. So we'll pop the link in the show notes there. And for folks who want to connect with you online, where can we find you?
My website is theradiantlifeproject.com. That's sort of the hub for all of my offerings and everything about me. And if you're a social media person, I'm at The Radiant Life Project on all the platforms, and I post daily, try to just give little gifts each day that might help improve your life. So feel free to check me out. And if my work resonates, I would be just so grateful for you to be in my community and help me spread this message.
Okay, amazing. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and for this really interesting and enlightening conversation we've had today. So really appreciate you being here with me.
Thank you. It's been so good talking to you.
Thanks, folks, for listening. Please check out the links in the show notes for Kate's book and her website and connect with her online. And I will see you in the next episode. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you've enjoyed it, please share with your friends and be sure to leave me a 5-star rating and review, especially if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. To find out more about my one-on-one coaching, please visit my website, which is emmaobriencoach.com. And remember, folks, when life gives you lemons, you can always choose another fruit. See you next time.